when I lived in Georgia, I lived in a real crap of a house on a property developed back in the late 1800s. The guy who originally bought the land and developed it was a weirdo, because the property had 9 different soil types on it, so he could make his own personal little paradise garden, and as someone who had severe allergen issues, it kind of screwed with me a lot while living there. Except during particularly heavy rains that washed away the waves of pollen and the rare snowy winters. During one of those rare snowy winters, my dad and I were doing stuff around the house. We were loading the fireplace, the dogs were sleeping, and we saw that the firewood pile was low, so we both went out to grab some more. It was no longer snowing super hard, but was still going, and it was very foggy outside. There's a funeral home up on the top of the hill beyond the house, past a mid-sized retaining pond that keeps our house from flooding when it rains real bad, and the parking lot of the home has a couple of street lights. From the light nearest our house, me and Dad see a silhouette against the snow. It was small, maybe just over 4 feet tall, which to me looked like a child. So me and Dad, being the at least halfway decent people that we are, start going up and see why this kid was out here at this time of the night. We found this kid that couldn't be more than 10 or 11 years old. He was pale as death, like he had been out in the snow for hours, and all he was wearing was a nightgown. He looked terrified and he's shaking and just stares at us, not saying a word. Dad almost instantly tells the kid to follow us because we gotta get him inside, or else he'll freeze to death. I agree and I reach out to offer him a hand. He recoils away and doesn't touch me, but he nods a bit when we gently invite him in, promise to get him warmed up and maybe something to eat. He starts to follow us down the hill and into the house. His face lights up immediately as soon as he's past the back door in what was ostensibly our laundry room. He stops shivering and stops looking scared. He just looks calm. Dad and I turn and start to rush off to get him some blankets, towels, and set up a space heater. We'd both turned away from him for less than 2 seconds. I turned back around really quick because I was going to ask him if he wanted some soup. He was gone. Disappeared like dust in the wind. I grab Dad's arm and he turns back and almost turns as white as the kid was. The kid is completely 100% gone. We look outside and see no footprints. The kid was barefoot, but the only tracks were me and Dad's boots, nothing else. Dad and I stared at each other for a while. He was clearly questioning whether or not he'd had some kind of hallucination. Except I was there and I had seen the kid too. So it was definitely not a hallucination. Over the following week and a half, the both of us asked around about a boy in a nightgown. It wasn't until Dad mentioned it to old Mrs. Funderburk, who was 96 at that time, that we got an answer. According to her, when she was a child and the area was a lot less developed, way back before she was born, there was an old ghost story about a boy who had been found dead in a rare Georgia snowstorm, not far from where our house was, in nothing but a nightgown. Nobody knew how or why. All anyone had was guesses, but it wasn't uncommon for people to claim seeing a boy, or at least his silhouette, in our area in the dead of night during really bad snowstorms. But nobody had ever gotten close to him before. He'd always just run off or disappeared into the snow and fog. The best guess that me and Dad could come up with after Mrs. Funderburk told us all she knew was that this kid must have gotten locked outside of his house during a terrible blizzard, possibly the Great Blizzard of 1899, and just couldn't get back in. Judging by what me and my dad saw, the boy had been pretty frail. He would have frozen to death quickly once the mercury went to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, but he disappeared when we brought him inside. It's been a while since that happened, at least 15 years. Nobody I've spoken to, including people who used to live in our immediate vicinity, has seen anything like what me and Dad saw. And sometimes even now I find myself wondering, if that was definitely real, and not just me and Dad having a kind of shared hallucination somehow, had that kid been there all this time? Was all he wanted to be invited into someplace warm, maybe somewhere he used to live, and that was good enough? I can still see his face if I think about it. That half-frozen, scared little face. Did it really take 100-some-odd years or more for someone to care enough to try and bring him out of the cold? This happened way back in 2016 in Cologne, Cebu. I went to Cebu to pick up my best friend who had just finished taking the board exam. I checked in at an old hotel in downtown Cologne. I forgot the exact name, but there was Century in the hotel's name. It wasn't my first time there, because during the review period, I went there once because my best friend was super stressed out and didn't have many friends or acquaintances in Cebu. I booked the same hotel, but a different room this time. October 17th, 2016 was the last day of the exam. After the exam, all of her classmates and roommates decided to celebrate. Me, I didn't join. I just went around Cologne, and around 7 p.m., I went back to the hotel. Our room was big, 2 beds with cabinets in the middle, and when you opened the main door, you could see the bathroom door straight ahead. It was creepy because the room was in the middle of a super long hallway, and there was a spot in the hallway whenever I passed, I would feel like I suddenly got lightheaded. Don't know why. When I got back to my room, I waited for my best friend. She said they were going to have a night out. I laid down scrolling through my phone until I got sleepy, but I was fighting off the sleep because I'm a deep sleeper and I might not hear her knock. My eyes were almost closed, but my brain was wide awake. I was lying on my right side facing the other bed. I could also see the bathroom door. So I would close my eyes and try to open them. Then at one point when I opened my eyes, I saw a man standing in the bathroom. He was wearing jersey shorts and a jersey tank top, but I couldn't see his face, only from his shoulders down. In my head, I wondered, how did he get in? The door was locked. Then my eyes started to close again even though my brain was awake. When I forced myself to open my eyes again, he was closer. He wasn't in the bathroom anymore. He was standing by the other bed. I closed my eyes again. Then when I forced myself to open them, he was standing right in front of me. Slowly fighting sleep, I was able to open my eyes one more time. This time he was facing me right to my face. I couldn't remember anything about his features other than he was pale. That's when I literally jumped out of bed. I ran out of the room, down to the lobby, and stayed there. I texted my best friend that I was in the lobby because I wasn't feeling okay. After about 30 minutes, she arrived. She said it might have just been a dream, but I said no, I was awake. My brain was, even though my eyes were closing. We eventually fell asleep. Around 3 a.m. I woke up because someone messaged me, and I couldn't fall back asleep. I started to scroll through my phone, then I suddenly felt my bed shaking. I looked at the mineral water on the side table, but it wasn't moving, so it couldn't have been an earthquake, meaning only my bed was shaking. I sat up and tried to wake up my best friend, but she wouldn't wake up, so I just sat there until morning. When she finally woke, I said, "I've been trying to wake you up for a while, my bed is shaking." She opened her laptop and said there was an earthquake in Cebu, but when I checked the news online, there was no report. I think she just said that so I wouldn't be scared. That afternoon, she needed to pack at her boarding house before going home. I was left at the hotel again. About 30 seconds after she left, there was a knock on the door. I thought she had forgotten something. When I opened it, there was no one, as in zero, and it was super impossible for someone to prank me because we were in the middle of a super long hallway. No one could run that fast to get away. After that, we really didn't stay for another night and went home to Bacolod. Honestly, until now, every time I think about what happened, my hair still stands on end. I don't know what I saw, but I'm sure it was not a dream, and the person I saw was not human either. After that experience, I promised myself I will never stay alone in an old hotel again, especially in Cologne. When I was 19, my mom and my sister and I lived in a rundown 2-story house that was already old when we moved in. The place always felt strange, not necessarily haunted, just old in a way that made every creak sound deliberate and every shadow seem darker than it should be. There were 3 rooms downstairs and 3 upstairs. My sister claimed 2 of the downstairs rooms, while my mom took one of the upstairs bedrooms. That left me with the largest room in the house. There was only one problem. Nobody wanted it. Inside that room there was a closet that had a second door, but not a normal closet door. A full-size door that had been nailed shut. Whoever sealed it hadn't used just one nail. There were several, along with old latch locks that looked like they had been added over time. The door immediately became a mystery. Why would someone hide a room inside of a closet? And why go to such lengths to keep it closed? Eventually, my sister and I decided we had to know. One afternoon, armed with a hammer and more curiosity than common sense, we pulled the nails free. The door groaned as we opened it. Behind it was another room, A completely hidden room. No windows, no visible light switch, just darkness. The beam from our flashlight barely seemed to penetrate it. The air inside felt stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Neither one of us wanted to step inside. Instead, we took several pictures using the flash on our camera. Then we slammed the door shut, nailed it closed again, and ran. Later that day, we looked through the photos. Every single picture was filled with orbs. Not one or two, but dozens. Some were small, others were large enough to obscure parts of the room. At the time, we couldn't tell if they were just dust particles reflecting the flash or something else. Still, the number of them was unsettling. For a while, it became one of those stories that we told friends. Then life moved on. Eventually, I forgot about it, until the morning the door opened by itself. At that time, I was working overnight shifts. One morning, after a long night at work, I came home exhausted and headed upstairs to bed. The moment I walked into my room, something felt off. I couldn't explain why. The room looked normal, yet every instinct told me something wasn't right. I walked toward my bed, then I glanced toward the closet. The hidden door was standing wide open. I froze. I knew for a fact it had been nailed shut. I had helped nail it shut. Yet there it was, open, not cracked, not partially open, but wide open. I screamed, then ran downstairs. My sister probably thought I was losing my mind as I tried to explain what I had seen, but then she came upstairs and looked for herself. She agreed to help me nail the door closed again. After that, I refused to sleep in my room. For nearly 2 months, I slept downstairs in my sister's room until eventually I started easing my way back. I moved my bed as far away from the closet as possible. If I had to sleep in that room, I wasn't going to sleep near that door. Over time, the fear faded, then I started dating an old friend that eventually became my wife. With her sleeping beside me every night, I felt safe again. The room stopped bothering me. At least, that's what I thought. One night we were both asleep when something happened that I still can't explain. I suddenly felt the back of my hair being grabbed, not brushed, but grabbed. My head was lifted upward, then slammed sideways into my solid oak nightstand. The impact was so violent that it woke up my girlfriend instantly. She sat up and asked what had happened, but I didn't have an answer. I still don't. That was the last night I ever slept in that room. Not long after, I moved out and got a place with my girlfriend. Many years have passed since then, and I've lived in other homes. I've experienced plenty of things that can be explained away with logic, but every now and then, I do think about that old house, about the hidden room concealed behind a nailed shut door, and about the photographs filled with unexplained orbs. Coming home from work to find that door standing open, and waking up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something in that room wanted me gone. Maybe there are explanations for all of it, maybe there's not. All I know is that after all these years, thinking about that room still gives me chills. I grew up as a biracial military brat and spent the better part of 2 decades growing up in Japan. Having spent years growing up in Japan and the United States, I can confidently say that there's something different when it comes to talk of paranormal or strange experiences. I imagine that many may be familiar with how popular spooky Asian stories have become in the last 20 or so years. Here's a few strange occurrences I've encountered myself. During my late teens to my early 20s, my social circle and I had a naive obsession with exploring places in Japan known for paranormal activities, urban legends, and being generally creepy. This was prior to the advent of reality television blowing up, like ghost hunting shows. In Japan, shows like this would broadcast regularly in the summer. This was our motivation for partaking in these excursions. As a military brat who grew up in Japan while attending school on a US military installation, I graduated in the early 2000s. Following graduation, most of my graduating class moved back to the US to pursue college or start their adult lives. Most would leave and never return to Japan. One of my parents is Japanese, so I had every reason to return. It was December, and I had just returned home to Japan after my fall semester at college. To my relief, a couple of my friends chose to remain in Japan after high school, so I had friends to hang out with while home on vacation. One evening, I'm out joyriding with my buddies. We had nowhere important to be and were just driving around aimlessly. Occasionally, we would stop by popular hangout spots for young adults, hoping to meet some cute girls to flirt with. Typical night for a bunch of 19-year-old guys. My friend, which I will call Jay, had a 90s Nissan 240SX, and he was obsessed with drifting. Truth be told, he wasn't that good at it, but you couldn't really fault him for trying. That evening, he suggested that we take off to Asamizo Park, near our hometown of Sagamihara. This large public park had many parking lots throughout its grounds. The lots were prime locations for him to practice whipping his car around while not causing damage or fender benders. Without hesitation, we all agreed and headed that direction. About 20 minutes later, we're passing the main entrance to Asamizo. During the day, this is a pleasant public park that many people go to. Japan, in comparison to other countries, is very relatively safe. This park was no exception to that. However, it did have some unfortunate events that happened there. After driving into the park for about 7 minutes, we reached the first parking lot. It was around 10 o'clock at night. We pulled in and parked. I hopped out of the car and pulled out a fresh pack of cigarettes. The evening was brisk. I gazed around, letting my night vision calibrate as the lights far off in the distance twinkled. My other friend who was with us, who I'll call R, also lit a cigarette, and we proceeded to have a conversation about whether Jay would be able to even get his car sideways. Jay pulls out and begins to whip his car around the parking lot. As his car spun counterclockwise, the wailing of his tires attempting to grip the asphalt broke silence in the evening. Even now I can close my eyes and still remember the smell of burning rubber. Adjacent to the parking lot was a tree line that led into some thick brush and wooded area. The park was known for its green belt scattered throughout it. I remember looking over my shoulder a few times that evening because I had this feeling that we were being watched from the woods. But each time I scanned the tree line, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. What happened next would cause me to jump so hard that I laugh even now when I think about it. The cell phone in my right pocket starts ringing and vibrating, and I jumped with a fright. The fact that light paranoia had set in from watching the tree lines didn't help with the anxiety experienced from the unexpected phone call. As I was attending college in the States and I was only back on vacation, I no longer had a cell phone in Japan. In fact, my younger sister had lent me her phone so that I could be reached if necessary. I pulled the phone out thinking that it was either my sister or my mom calling for something, as none of my friends even had this number. I looked down at the green backlit LCD screen and saw displayed in Japanese that it was a restricted number. Thought it was strange, but figured maybe my sister was calling from a public phone. I answered the phone and said "Moshi Moshi," and there was nothing but silence for a response. I remembered hearing a bit of static, and then finally I heard the voice of a Japanese girl. My immediate thoughts were this must be a friend of my sister, so I explained that I'm her brother and borrowing her phone for the evening. If you need to get hold of my sister, you could call the house. The girl apologized, and I reassured her that no harm had been done, and I promptly ended the phone call. I put the phone back in my pocket and focused back to the ruckus of noise coming from Jay's car. It must have not been 10 minutes later that the phone started ringing again. This time I was sure that it had to be my sister or my mother. Earlier that day I left home and didn't say where I was going or when I planned on coming back. It wasn't uncommon for my mother or sister to call and ask if I had eaten dinner or if she should leave food out for me. I pulled the phone out and once again I have a phone call, and it was from a restricted number. I answered the phone, and this time the voice of the same Japanese girl was on the other end. Before I could ask why she was calling from my sister, she cut me off. Now, based on the previous phone call, I thought there were a few things that were funny. I know most of my sister's friends, and I recognized their voices over the phone. This girl, on the other hand, I did not. Additionally, my sister never mentioned anything about new friends, and her circle was pretty tight. She wasn't very big on being a social butterfly, but perhaps I was wrong. My sister is 3 years younger than me, so my assumption was this girl had to be around her age and too young for me to know. I had very little interest in engaging in conversation with her. As she started probing my questions, I kept my answers vague. I don't even know why I continued to entertain a conversation with her, but hanging up would just be rude. Suddenly she asked what I was doing in a park so late in the evening. I almost began to answer when it dawned on me. I didn't mention anything about where I was or what I was doing. I told her I never said that I was at a park. She lightly giggled and tried to play it off, insisting that she thought I said I was at a park. I told her this was weird and that I had to go, and then I hung up. Jay grew tired of drifting at this point. He pulled up to us from the driver's side and suggested we change up the scenery. R and I hopped back in the vehicle and off we went. Now at another parking lot we hop out and Jay continues to do his thing. This parking lot had soccer fields not too far from it, and the lamps in the parking lot painted an orange hue, which was a bit comforting. Oddly enough, the feeling of being watched returned to me. I swung around to my right and stared at the empty field on the other side of the parking lot fence. There was nothing. At this point, Jay parks his car and shuts it off. Now silence and a thin film of burnt rubber veiled the parking lot. R starts asking what was up with all the phone calls I was getting. I began to explain to them both what transpired. They both agreed that it was a little strange, but speculated that maybe my sister mentioned to her friends that her older brother was back in town. Jay proceeds to tease me that I should start talking to the girl, but I protest because I have no interest. Suddenly, the phone rings again. Same deal, restricted phone number and same girl. This time she sounds a bit more aggressive. How come you left? What was wrong with the last spot? I asked her what she meant. She then says that I left the last parking lot that I was just at. I remember the hair standing on the back of my neck. I made it a point to be very vague and never mentioned what I was doing or where I was. Yet somehow, this girl knew what I was doing and knew that we had left the first parking lot. Something didn't feel right, so I hung up on her. A moment later, my phone is blowing up. I answer again, this time irate, and I yell, "What do you want?" There is silence, then I hear light static. In a sort of hushed manner, I hear her voice. "I'm at the field. I see you." I spin around and face the field looking for any sign of a person. I remember my heart racing a bit as I fumbled to figure out what exactly was going on. "What do you mean you see me at the field?" I asked. She tells me that she sees me standing with my friends, wearing my gray jacket and my buddy's car. She tells me she's coming over to us and wants to hang out. The line goes dead. I look at both Jay and R and give the rundown on what she said. They both had weird looks on their faces, and I know them well enough to know when they're lying or pulling my leg. They both look clueless. My phone rings again. "Hey, I'm almost there. Will you wait for me?" the girl asked. "No, what's going on here? Why do you keep asking me questions? How do you know where I'm at? And who are you anyway? I know all of my sister's friends and I don't recognize your voice." She replied in another hushed manner, "I never said I knew your sister." At this point, I was going crazy. I look back at the field and I don't see anything. As I'm still on the phone with her, I asked her where she was. She said she would be there shortly. I'm sure my friend sensed the panic in my voice. Jay goes on about nobody knows that we're out here. How does she seem to have our location? Mind you, this is the year 2000, and social media, modern internet, and smartphones are not a thing yet. People just can't get your location like that. On top of that, we're a few kilometers out of the way. You just don't randomly run into people like that. The evening is getting late as it's past 11 p.m. and I have no explanation as to what's going on. My phone rings again, and before I can even answer hello, she asks if I can see her. I'm spinning and jerking like a laundry machine agitator at this point. Both of my friends decided that this is too weird. R yanks the phone from my hand and proceeds to speak with her as well. I should explain that we all speak Japanese. Although I'm telling this story in English, all the conversations are actually happening in Japanese. R, feeling like this is a joke, decided to toy with her a bit. He starts to ask her what she's wearing. She begins explaining something to him from what I can hear from how he responds. He then asks her what color her undergarments are, but then she abruptly hangs up. R tells me that he thinks he annoyed her enough that she may not bother calling again. We all nervously chuckle as we cannot even begin to understand what all just transpired. My phone blows up again. Same deal, restricted call. I answer again, this time upset, but I'm cut off. Her voice is much louder now. I could hear what sounded like wind in the background. She begins saying that she's quickly approaching us, yelling to not leave her. She wants to be with us. All of a sudden I hear Jay drop a soda can as he faced the field. "What the hell is that?" I remember him saying in disbelief. I hang the phone up, I look at both my friends, and Jay motions to jump in the car. We all jump in and he stomps on the gas as we make our escape. My phone rings again. I look, and although I don't want to answer, I feel as though I need to. I take the call and I can hear her voice. It sounds slightly huskier. She casually said, "It's a shame that you all left before I could reach you." Jay is driving frantically away from the park. At the time, I had no idea where he was taking us. It was just quiet in the car as I had the phone held up to my ear. "Oh well, I guess I just need to follow and find you at the Family Mart that you're going to stop at," she said as she gave a creepy laugh. I then replied, "What the hell do you mean by the Family Mart that we're going to?" Before I realized it, Jay had cut the wheel hard and pulled to the side of the road and threw his four-way hazard lights and brought the car to a sudden stop. R almost hit the dashboard sitting in the shotgun seat. Jay turned and looked at me. I can still remember the white look on his face. He then quietly asked, "How did she know I was taking us to Family Mart?" Family Mart is a Japanese convenience store chain found throughout Japan. I hung the phone up and then powered it off. We sat in silence for a moment there. This felt like a weird dream or something. I told Jay, "Let's go somewhere else." Shortly after, we drove to a 24-hour restaurant that was our hangout spot where many of our Japanese friends frequented. We just wanted somewhere brightly lit and somewhat crowded to chill out. As we walked up to the entrance, I could see some friends occupying a booth. We walked in and proceeded to join the party. After we ordered some coffee, we started explaining our strange occurrence. Initially, everyone listened on with excitement, but as I explained the story, the look of excitement written on everyone's face eventually faded, and it got awkwardly quiet. Another female friend of mine who sat across from me, I'll call her A-chan, looked at me and asked again whereabouts in the park that we were. As she asked me this, I could see her make eye contact with her boyfriend, H. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it up just as he went into his explanation. He then began to explain, "You guys, you all do know what happened in Asamizo Park, right?" We all gave a blank glance. He continued that there was an incident that happened in that park one evening, where a girl was walking through the park, someone approached her and dragged her onto the greenbelt, where she was essayed and strangled. I heard some rumors about some bad juju associated with the area. In disbelief, I scoffed, "You're joking, right?" Without any hesitation, he looked at me and said, "Nope, but we need to go to a shrine. Her spirit may have latched onto you."